I have to believe that Scotty's on this team because I think we know with this roster, the Fantastic Four, they're going to get the majority of the playing time at wide receiver. So for Scotty, I think he's on this team, one, because he does still have that deep threat, and we know he has that. But he's got to be involved in special teams one way or another. So I think the thing for me that was so confusing about it is why wasn't he getting as many of these reps at gunner like throughout the preseason? And we know that he lines up in practice. He'll line up at kick return, but he never kick returns in the game or anything like that. So why necessarily did he make this team unless he's going to play gunner? I think that has to be the case for Scotty Miller.
He's one of those guys that he lines up all the time as a punt return guy and fields punts in practice, but has never really gotten that opportunity during the games. It's a little puzzling. I think too, when you look at this roster, and there's a big reason right there. Les Evans, Brady's little buddy Scotty. Yes. This is Tom Brady's likely his last year in Tampa Bay, possibly in the NFL. This is not the time to try to break in some new young wide receivers. And I think this team has invested some time in Jalen Darden, and they like how he's progressed this offseason and during training camp. He has looked better. We're not trying to blow smoke here or justify the team's decision to keep him. I don't think, Matt, we've said a discouraging word about Jalen Darden in the whole month of August, have we? I think our commentary on Darden has been good because he has performed well. He has gotten open. He hasn't gotten yelled at for running the wrong routes or cutting his route short. He's caught the ball. He looks a little bit more fearless returning kicks and punts. I think that he's turned a corner. So having said that, you're not going to stock this team for Tom Brady with too many young guys. This is the young guy they have chosen to saddle their horse to right now. Now, I will say this. If you've read PewterReport.com, and I'll grab the story here and put it up on in the chat. We broke the story, not just we'll get to Logan Ryan in a minute, but the Bucs will be keeping 7 wide receivers. The Bucs roster cuts, I don't think have actually been announced yet. Tampa Bay is notoriously tardy for announcing their cuts, not at 4. They usually do it like around 5 or so. But the 7 wide receivers, of course, the Fantastic Four: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, and Russell Gage. They parted ways with Tyler Johnson. That was a bit of a surprise. They kept Scotty Miller. That was also a bit of a surprise. Breshad Perriman is a player we'll talk about in a second, but Jalen Darden is the guy that I believe is going to get the first crack at returning punts for sure, and maybe kicks. Or Rachaad White might take those duties as well. I thought he did an adequate job in the preseason. But as it pertains to Scotty Miller, this is a player that Tom Brady does trust. He does have some speed. He's healthy now. And Matt, there were days, and we documented this, where he really showed up in training camp. He had some very good catches, very good days in practice. And he just has more experience than a Devin Tompkins, who I thought was equally as impressive. But when you look at Tompkins, he's probably going to go on the practice squad, right? And Tompkins, I think, will end up making the active roster at some point this season. Like we saw Cyril Grayson come up, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen the team add receivers during the season. It would not surprise me at all if before the first game you see Devin Tompkins added to the 53 and maybe Breshad Perriman go on the practice squad. So again, this is the final 53 for today.
Right. There's still 2 weeks until the season.
Exactly. So there's going to be some other moves made. They're going to acquire some players, maybe off the waiver wire, maybe via trade, whatever. This is not the final set in stone roster. So I think that Breshad Perriman may not be on the 53-man roster when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys game. He might be on the practice squad by then. We'll see. A lot depends. You could have an injury in practice, right?
Yeah.
Chris Godwin could have a setback, or he just might not be ready to play. The doctors might not clear him for that Cowboys game. So as it stands right now, I understand there are some people that are really questioning why Breshad Perriman's on this team. And I'll tell you why he made it over Tyler Johnson. Tyler Johnson has had a better preseason. The problem with Tyler Johnson is he's just not as fast as Breshad Perriman and does not have the ability to separate. And he, quite frankly, he's not as physical. He's a bigger guy, but we saw it last year. when they put him in the slot to try to replace Chris Godwin, especially in that Carolina game at Carolina. He did not do a good job blocking in the run game. And they ended up actually replacing him with Cyril Grayson in the slot that game, as well as the Jets game, and also using Breshad Perriman there. And Perriman came alive at the end of the season. He had 5 catches for 44 yards in the season finale before injuring his hamstring and was unable to participate in the playoff game. Mm-hmm. And then he had 2 big catches in the Jets game as well. So they like Perriman because he has the size that Tyler Johnson has, but he's faster and he's got more experience. And he can also play in special teams. That's something that Tyler Johnson did not do. I remember sitting in the press box next to Josh Capo for the Titans game. We're watching Tyler Johnson line up as a gunner on one particular play. And maybe it was the fact that he was just out there on offense and was gassed a little bit, or maybe it was just a loaf. I don't know. But I remember Josh and I both saying to each other, wow, Tyler Johnson looks like he's loafing out there. Like he's just jogging down the field on this punt return. And it was kind of stunning. And so Tyler Johnson, again, is another player that really hadn't found a role on special teams. And I think that ultimately cost him.
That was something that if you go back to last season, we were talking about of like whether or not, how can Tyler Johnson make this team if he doesn't play on special teams? And that was something that he didn't really do this season or in this training camp. So I still disagree with, cutting Tyler Johnson. I would have kept him over Breshad Perriman. And I do understand the aspect of he's faster than Tyler Johnson. I think he had like a little bit of guaranteed money, but in my opinion, it wasn't like enough money to be like, oh, like we can't get through our financial system for the rest of the season if we cut Breshad Perriman right now. I know you said he made some catches in the Jets game and that Panthers game. I really think that touchdown against the Bills, the walk-off in overtime, I guess it bought him a lot more time than expected because Tyler, you can't, first of all, Breshad Perriman wasn't healthy for more than half of this preseason. Tyler Johnson had a great preseason. He had 11 receptions for over 133 yards. So it's not for a lack of play. And while I do disagree with Tyler Johnson getting cut by this team, you can understand the fact that, all right, well, you look at the first 4 wide receivers, they're not going to be playing special teams. So if you're keeping, if you're keeping 6, you're relying on 2 guys that can go and play special teams.
And they're keeping
the Bucs
7
are keeping,
now.
But now the Bucs are keeping 7. So you can afford to have one guy that maybe still isn't a special teams guru. But for Tyler Johnson, I feel like if you have to separate yourself from everyone else, then start playing a little special teams. And, he did it. And that's why he's not on this team right now.
One thing about Scotty Miller too, and Todd Bowles kind of gave us a hint about this. Scotty Miller did not have a good preseason, but he had a good camp. I think that, again, we saw enough catches and performances in practice. It just didn't translate into the games. He had very little opportunities. He did get open, as Josh Capo from Pewter Report pointed out.
Yes.
After the Dolphins game, he was open the most of any of the receivers. That's part of it. But you got to catch the ball when you're throwing the ball. He had 2 big drops from Blaine Gabbert, one against the Titans game and one against the Colts game. But I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
I appreciate the hair comment. I think Tom is the reason. Yeah, I think. Listen, Tom Brady does have some say so in which receivers he throws to. Like, there's no doubt about it. Going back to Scotty Miller though, the fact, Matt, that Devin Tompkins, Jarrett Stearns, and Kalen Geiger didn't do anything really in either of those last 2 games to pull ahead of Scotty Miller, right? To really, have 3 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, whatever. The fact that didn't happen, I thought, kept Scotty in the race, ultimately, looking now in hindsight of why they made that decision. I think that had one of those receivers done that, then maybe it's a different story. I put up there from Common Sense, no way Tompkins. We appreciate the super chat, Jeff, and the compliment about my hair. It goes a long way. I really appreciate that a lot. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you $4.99 back just for that. I'm going to send you the $4.99 just for that compliment. That's awesome. No way Tompkins is on the practice squad. Here's the thing: the only thing that the teams have to look at, they don't get to watch practice film. So the only practice film that anyone has seen outside of the Buccaneers is when the Dolphins were in town and then when the Bucs went to Tennessee. So if the Titans liked him from practice, and he did have some good performances there against both teams, those would be the two teams that might be after Devin Tompkins. But then you got to put him on the active roster. He is going to return to the practice squad because he didn't do much in terms of production-wise in the preseason. The other thing is he's small. He's the smallest out of all the receivers. He's even smaller than Jalen Darden.
Yeah.
I think the kid can play, but he didn't go out there and light it up in the preseason. He didn't have a Skylar Thompson type preseason where you're just like Emo, yeah, where this kid just kind of comes out of nowhere to lead the league in passing. He didn't do that. He didn't lead the team in receiving. So I don't know that there's enough film out there to justify putting him on your active roster for another team, unless maybe the Dolphins or the Titans just saw this kid and just said, wow. But even then, it wasn't like he was the best receiver on the field in either Tennessee or here in Tampa when the Dolphins came to town either.
I think he's impressive for an undrafted free agent, that if you give him a little more development, the practice squad is perfect for him. I mean, you look around the league, there's only so many players that are undrafted free agents that make a career for themselves in the NFL. Of course, Cam Brate being one of those. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like he was going to come in and, usurp Russell Gage for the number 3 wide receiver. And sure, his height has a lot to do with that. I really do think he's going to be a prime candidate for one of those guys that they announce will be called up to the active roster on game days. I really do think
I agree.
That could be a possibility.
I wouldn't be surprised if by the time we get to Dallas, if Breshad Perriman is on the practice squad and then Devin Tompkins is up. See, there's a couple procedural things too that I need to kind of explain. If you're on the active roster and you're a vested veteran, then your salary is guaranteed for the entire season if you're on there for week 1. That's already happened to Breshad Perriman, so he can't claim that again. Okay? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of sleight of hand salary cap magic happening here, that this is not the final 53. So all those people that are up in arms about Breshad Perriman, I'm not saying he's not going to be on the active roster when the Dallas Cowboys game rolls around. But I'm not saying he's going to be either. This team does like Devin Tompkins. And again, heed my words. Don't be surprised if that is one switch that they make in putting Devin Tompkins up on the active roster, maybe as early as week 1, instead of Breshad Perriman, who might go in the practice squad. Something to keep an eye on.